One day before Christmas, I went to my daughter-in-law's house. But the moment I arrived, I overheard a strange conversation about my $3 million fortune. That's when I realized my husband was in bed with her. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The December air was crisp against my face as I walked up the front steps of my son's house, my arms full of carefully wrapped Christmas presents. At 62, I still insisted on hand-wrapping every gift, using the good paper and real ribbon like my mother had taught me. These traditions mattered, especially now that our family seemed so scattered. I had called ahead to let Cleo know I was coming, but she hadn't answered. No matter. I had a spare key that my son David had given me years ago, back when we were closer. Back when his wife actually seemed to enjoy my company. The house was quiet when I let myself in. Too quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. David's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was still at the law firm. He worked such long hours these days, barely making it home for dinner most nights. Cleo often complained about it, though I noticed she seemed to fill her time just fine without him. I set the presents down gently on the entry table and called out softly, "Cleo, it's just me, Norma. I brought the Christmas gifts early." No response, but I could hear her voice coming from upstairs. She must be on the phone. I decided to wait in the living room rather than interrupt her call, but as I moved toward the couch, her words drifted down the stairwell with perfect clarity. "The $3 million will be ours soon enough," she was saying, her voice carrying that confident tone she used when she thought no one was listening. "Clark says the old woman won't last much longer anyway." My blood turned to ice. Old woman? $3 million? That was the exact amount Clark and I had in our joint investment accounts. The nest egg we'd built together over 37 years of marriage. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be what it sounded like. There had to be some explanation. "You just need to be patient a little longer," Cleo continued, and I could hear her moving around upstairs. "Clark's got it all figured out. Once she's gone, we won't have to pretend anymore. No more playing the loving daughter-in-law. No more Sunday dinners with her boring stories about the good old days." The contempt in her voice hit me like a physical blow. All those years of family dinners, of trying to build a relationship with my son's wife, of biting my tongue when she made little cutting remarks disguised as jokes. She had been acting the entire time. But worse than that, much worse, was the implication of what she was saying. Once she's gone, Clark's got it all figured out. My own husband was involved in whatever this was. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly moved toward the kitchen, pretending I had just arrived. But as Cleo rounded the corner, she wasn't alone. Behind her, adjusting his shirt and running his hand through his graying hair, was Clark, my husband of 37 years. The sight of him there, in my son's house, clearly having just been upstairs with my daughter-in-law, shattered something inside me that I didn't even know could break. His face went pale when he saw me, and for a moment, none of us moved. "Norma," he stammered, his voice rough. "What are you doing here?" What was I doing here? I was bringing Christmas presents to my family. I was trying to be the grandmother and mother-in-law I thought they wanted me to be. I was living my life completely unaware that the two people I trusted most in this world were plotting something terrible. Cleo recovered first, smoothing her hair and giving me that practiced smile she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, Norma, I didn't hear you come in. Clark just stopped by to help me move some furniture upstairs. You know how David's always too busy with work to help around the house." The lie rolled off her tongue so easily, so naturally, that I almost believed it myself. Almost. But I had seen Clark's face when he first spotted me. That wasn't the expression of a man who had just been moving furniture. That was the expression of a man who had been caught doing something he shouldn't. "I brought the Christmas presents," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "I thought I'd drop them off early." Clark was already moving toward the door, avoiding my eyes. "I should get going. Lots to do before Christmas." He brushed past me without the usual kiss on the cheek, without the warm smile he'd given me every day for nearly 4 decades. The man who left that house was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Cleo walked me to the door a few minutes later, chattering about Christmas plans and how excited she was for the holiday. But all I could hear were her earlier words echoing in my head. The old woman won't last much longer. Clark's got it all figured out. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The decorated houses and twinkling lights that had seemed so cheerful on the drive over now looked garish and fake, like props in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. At home, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house Clark and I had bought when we were still young and full of dreams. The house where we'd raised David, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, where we'd built what I thought was a solid, loving marriage. But as I finally walked through the front door, I realized I was seeing everything with new eyes. This wasn't my sanctuary anymore. This was the home of a woman whose husband and daughter-in-law were plotting against her, a woman who had somehow become an obstacle to be removed rather than a person to be loved. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. The worst part was the dawning realization that I had no idea how long this had been going on, or how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Clark, listening to his steady breathing, and wondering how many nights he had lain there planning my demise. When he kissed my forehead good morning, the same gentle gesture he'd done for decades, my skin crawled. "You seem tired, honey," he said over coffee, his voice full of what I now recognized as performed concern. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about those sleeping pills he mentioned. 3 days ago, I would have smiled and agreed. Now I heard something different in his suggestion. Why was my husband so interested in me taking sleeping medication? "I'm fine," I said, watching his face carefully. "Just the usual Christmas stress." He nodded, but I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment? Frustration? I wasn't sure, but it wasn't the look of a man who simply wanted his wife to get better rest. The next few days passed like a terrible dream. I went through the motions of normal life while watching my husband with new eyes. Clark, who had always been attentive, suddenly seemed overly solicitous. He brought me tea without being asked, suggested I take naps, and kept asking if I felt under the weather. "You know, sweetheart," he said on Thursday morning, buttering his toast with careful precision, "maybe we should review our insurance policies, just to make sure everything's up to date." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "Insurance policies? Why now?" "Well, we're not getting any younger," he said with a laugh that sounded forced. "I just want to make sure you're taken care of if something happens to me." But I heard what he was really saying. He wanted to make sure he was taken care of if something happened to me. That afternoon, Cleo called to invite us to dinner on Saturday. Her voice was honey sweet, the way it always was when she wanted something. "I'm making that roast you love so much, Norma," she said, "and I thought we could talk about Christmas plans. Maybe discuss some family business, too." Family business. The phrase sent chills down my spine. "What kind of family business?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, just boring stuff. Wills, financial planning, that sort of thing. Clark mentioned you two have been talking about updating your estate plan." We hadn't been talking about anything of the sort, but apparently, Clark had been talking to Cleo about it. I accepted the dinner invitation because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. But first, I did something I never thought I would do in 37 years of marriage. I went through Clark's things. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. In his desk drawer, underneath a stack of old tax returns, was a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were photocopies of our insurance policies, our investment statements, and a handwritten note in Clark's familiar scrawl. Life insurance, $500K, investments, $2, 8M, house, $400K, total, 7M. Below that, in different ink as if added later, natural causes, heart attack most likely, history of hypertension, no autopsy if handled correctly. My legs gave out, and I sank into Clark's desk chair, staring at the paper in my trembling hands. This wasn't just adultery or greed. This was premeditated murder. I photographed the note with my phone and put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Then I went to my bedroom and cried until my throat was raw. When Clark came home that evening, he found me cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. "Smells wonderful in here," he said, kissing my cheek. The same spot where his lips touched felt like it was burning. "I made your favorite," I said. "Pot roast with those little potatoes you like." He beamed at me, and for a moment, I saw a ghost of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But then he started talking about our Saturday dinner with Cleo and David, and the illusion shattered. "Cleo mentioned she wants to discuss some financial planning," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I think it's smart to get our affairs in order." "What kind of affairs?" I asked, though I already knew. "Just making sure everything's set up properly. You know, in case something unexpected happens to either of us." He was so calm about it, so matter-of-fact, as if we were discussing what to plant in the garden come spring, not plotting my death. That night, I lay awake listening to him sleep and realized I was sharing a bed with someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The man I had given my whole adult life to, the father of my child, was calmly planning to kill me for money. But what terrified me most wasn't even Clark's betrayal. It was the realization that Cleo was the mastermind. She was the one who had seduced my husband, turned him against me, and come up with this plan. And my son, my beloved David, was married to this woman. Did he know? Was he part of it too? I couldn't bear the thought that my own child might want me dead. Saturday's dinner loomed ahead of me like an execution date. I knew they would try to get me to sign something or agree to some change in our estate planning. The question was, how far were they willing to go if I refused? As Clark's breathing deepened into sleep beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be their victim. I was going to find out exactly what they had planned, and then I was going to stop them. But first, I needed to know if my son was involved, and that knowledge, I realized, might be the most devastating discovery of all. Friday morning, I did something I never imagined I would do. I hired a private investigator. I found Marcus Chen through an online search, choosing him because his website emphasized discretion, and his office was across town where no one would recognize me. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said after I'd explained my situation, "I have to ask, are you certain about what you overheard? Sometimes in emotional situations, we can misinterpret things." I showed him the photograph of Clark's handwritten note. His expression grew serious as he read the words, "natural causes," and "no autopsy if handled correctly." "I'll need a few days to gather information," he said. "In the meantime, don't change your routine. Act normally. And Mrs. Hartwell?" He looked at me with genuine concern. "Be very careful what you eat or drink, especially anything your husband prepares for you." The drive home felt surreal. At 62, I was hiring someone to investigate my own husband for planning my murder. It sounded like something from a television show, not my quiet suburban life. That afternoon, Clark announced he was going to help David with some yard work. I watched through the window as he drove away, then waited 10 minutes before following him. Instead of going to David's house, he turned into the parking lot of the Marriott Hotel downtown. My heart hammered as I parked where I could see the entrance. 20 minutes later, Clark emerged with Cleo. They weren't touching, but there was an intimacy in the way they walked together, heads bent close in conversation. When they got to Clark's car, she kissed him. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a real kiss. A lover's kiss. I drove home and vomited in my own bathroom, my whole body shaking with the confirmation of what I already knew. My marriage was a lie. My family was a lie. Everything I'd built my life around was rotten at the core. The weekend dinner at David and Cleo's house felt like walking into a trap. I dressed carefully, choosing a blue dress Clark had always complimented, and put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. If this was going to be some kind of performance, I was going to play my part perfectly. David hugged me at the door, the same warm embrace he'd given me since childhood. For a moment, I let myself believe he was innocent in all this. My son, my baby, couldn't possibly want me dead. "Mom, you look beautiful," he said, and his smile seemed genuine. "I'm so glad we're doing this. It feels like we don't spend enough time together as a family anymore." Cleo appeared beside him, stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Norma, come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The dining room was set with their good china, candles flickering on the table. It all looked so normal, so loving. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought this was just a pleasant family dinner. But I did know better. Clark was already there, sitting at the table with a manila folder beside his plate. My chest tightened when I saw it. "I hope you don't mind," Cleo said as we sat down. But Clark thought this might be a good time to discuss some family business. "Nothing urgent, just some paperwork that needs updating." David nodded, cutting into his roast. "Dad mentioned you two were reviewing your estate planning. That's smart at your age. Jenny and I should probably do the same thing soon." Jenny was David's first wife, his college sweetheart who had died in a car accident 8 years ago. Cleo was his second wife, the woman he'd married 2 years later in what I now realized was probably the worst decision of his life. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Clark opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "Just updating our wills and beneficiary information, making sure everything's clear and organized." He slid a paper across to me. It was a will revision form, already filled out in Clark's handwriting. I scanned it quickly, my blood growing colder with each line. According to this document, upon my death, everything would go to Clark. And upon his death, everything would be divided between David and Cleo. But there was a clause I'd never seen before. If David predeceased Clark and Cleo, everything would go to Cleo alone. "This seems very detailed," I said carefully. Cleo laughed, a musical sound that now made my skin crawl. Cleo insisted we be thorough. She's so organized about these things. Much better than I am with paperwork. "The important thing," Clark added, "is that everything's legal and binding. We want to make sure there are no complications later." "No complications? Like an investigation into my death, perhaps?" I looked at David, who was focused on his dinner, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around the table. Either he was an incredible actor, or he truly had no idea what his wife and stepfather were planning. "I'd like to have my own lawyer review these before I sign," I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clark's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Cleo's smile became strained. "Of course," Clark said finally. "Though it's all pretty standard stuff. I used the same lawyer who handled the Johnsons' estate planning. Still, I'd be more comfortable having someone look it over," I insisted. David looked up, sensing the tension. "That makes sense, Mom. It's always good to get a second opinion on legal documents." Cleo's hand tightened on her wine glass. "Of course, Norma. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything." But her eyes were cold now, calculating. I had just thrown a wrench into their carefully laid plans. The rest of dinner passed in stilted conversation about Christmas plans and David's work. I played the part of the loving mother and wife, complimenting Cleo's cooking and asking David about his latest cases. But underneath the surface, I could feel the shift. I was no longer an unwitting victim walking toward slaughter. I was now a problem to be solved. As we said our goodbyes, Clark put his arm around my waist in what would have looked like a loving gesture to anyone watching, but his grip was too tight, possessive and warning. "We'll get those papers sorted out this week," he murmured in my ear. "No need to drag this out unnecessarily." In the car driving home, he was quieter than usual. When we got home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. I could hear him talking on the phone, but his voice was too low for me to make out the words. I went to bed early, claiming a headache. But I lay awake listening to Clark's movements downstairs, wondering what he was planning now that I'd complicated things. The next morning, Marcus Chen called with his preliminary findings. What he told me made everything so much worse than I'd imagined. "Mrs. Hartwell, your husband has been having an affair with your daughter-in-law for approximately 2 years. They've been meeting at the Marriott twice a week, always on the same days. But that's not the worst part." I gripped the phone tighter. "What else?" "Your husband has significant gambling debts that you apparently don't know about. He owes over $400,000 to some very unpleasant people. People who don't take kindly to late payments." My legs went weak. $400,000? How was that possible? "There's more," Marcus continued. "Your daughter-in-law has been systematically alienating your son from you. She's been telling him for months that you disapprove of their marriage, that you think he made a mistake marrying her. She's been intercepting your calls and visits when possible, making excuses for why you can't see him." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Cleo hadn't just seduced my husband and convinced him to kill me for money. She'd also been destroying my relationship with my son, ensuring he wouldn't ask too many questions when I was gone. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Marcus's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here. There's one more thing. Your daughter-in-law has been researching untraceable poisons online, specifically ones that mimic heart attacks in elderly people." The room spun around me. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair, my vision blurring. They weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to kill me soon. The next few days were the longest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal while knowing that the two people I'd trusted most in the world were actively planning my death. Every meal Clark prepared, every cup of tea he offered, every solicitous inquiry about my health felt like a countdown to my execution. Marcus Chen's investigations continued to reveal disturbing details. Clark had been forging my signature on withdrawal slips, taking money from our joint accounts to pay his gambling debts. The debts were worse than Marcus had initially discovered, nearly $500,000 owed to loan sharks who had already started making threats. "Your husband is desperate, Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus explained during our phone call Tuesday morning. "Desperate people do desperate things. Based on what I've found, I believe they're planning to act soon, probably within the next week or two. Before Christmas?" The irony was bitter. They wanted to kill me before Christmas, probably so they could spend the holidays grieving convincingly before claiming my inheritance. "It makes sense from their perspective," Marcus said gently. "Holiday stress, family gatherings, rich food. There are many ways to explain a sudden heart attack during this time of year." That afternoon, Cleo called with another dinner invitation. "I know we just saw you Saturday, Norma, but David was saying how much he enjoyed our family time. Would you and Clark like to come over tomorrow night? I'm making lasagna." Her voice was sugar-sweet, but I could hear the calculation underneath. They needed another opportunity to get me to sign those papers, or to implement whatever plan they'd devised after I'd complicated things by wanting a lawyer's review. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, matching her false warmth. "What can I bring?" "Oh, just yourselves. Though if you want to bring that wine you served last Thanksgiving," Clark mentioned how much he enjoyed it. After I hung up, I stared at the phone in my hands. She wanted me to bring wine that I would select, carry to their house, and presumably drink. It would be the perfect delivery method for whatever they had planned. I called Marcus immediately. "They want me to bring wine to dinner tomorrow night. This is it, isn't it?" "Probably." "Mrs. Hartwell, I think it's time to involve the police." But I wasn't ready for that step yet. If I was wrong about David's innocence, bringing in authorities could destroy my relationship with my son forever. And if I was right about his innocence, I needed to find a way to protect him from learning that his wife and stepfather were murderers. That evening, Clark was unusually attentive at dinner. He'd made my favorite meal, chicken parmesan with garlic bread, and opened a bottle of the expensive wine we usually saved for special occasions. "What's the occasion?" I asked, though I was afraid I knew. "Can't a man spoil his wife without a reason?" he said, raising his glass to toast. "To us, Norma. To 37 wonderful years." Wonderful years. I stared at him across the table, this man I'd loved for most of my adult life, and tried to see some trace of the person I'd married. But all I saw was a stranger wearing my husband's face, a stranger who was planning to poison me within the next 24 hours. I raised my glass and smiled. To us? The wine tasted bitter, but that might have been my imagination. I only took small sips and made sure Clark drank more than I did. If he was testing something on me tonight, I wanted to minimize my exposure. After dinner, Clark suggested we watch a movie together. He chose The Notebook, a film that used to make me cry happy tears. Now, watching the elderly couple's love story, all I could think about was how Clark was planning to make me into a grieving widow's tale, except I wouldn't be around to grieve. The next day, Wednesday, I spent the morning at the bank. I told the manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, that I was concerned about some unusual account activity and wanted to review all transactions from the past 6 months. What I found was devastating. Clark had been systematically draining our accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as his gambling debts grew. In total, he'd taken nearly $200,000 without my knowledge or consent. We still had the bulk of our nest egg, but it was clear he'd been planning this betrayal for months. "Is there anything specific you'd like us to do about these unauthorized withdrawals?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I may need to make some changes to our account access soon." That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in 37 years of marriage. I bought a bottle of wine and had it tested at a private lab Marcus had recommended. If Clark and Cleo were planning to poison me tonight, I wanted to be ready. The lab technician, a serious young woman named Dr. Park, explained how quickly they could test for common poisons. "If you suspect someone is trying to harm you, Mrs. Hartwell, you should really contact the police." "I will," I promised. After tonight. At home, I prepared for what might be my last dinner with my family. I dressed in the green dress David had always said was his favorite, the one I'd worn to his law school graduation. If something went wrong tonight, I wanted my son to remember me at my best. Clark was in an unusually good mood as we drove to David's house. He hummed along with the radio and complimented my appearance twice. Anyone watching would have thought we were a happy couple heading to a pleasant family dinner. But I caught him checking his watch repeatedly, and his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He was nervous about something. Excited and nervous. David met us at the door with his usual warm hug, but I studied his face carefully, looking for any sign that he knew what was planned. All I saw was genuine pleasure at seeing us, and perhaps a touch of fatigue from his long hours at the firm. "Mom, you look beautiful as always," he said, kissing my cheek. "That color is perfect on you." Cleo appeared beside him, radiant in a black cocktail dress that seemed far too formal for a family dinner at home. She was dressed for a celebration. "Norma, and you brought the wine. Wonderful." She took the bottle from my hands before I could object, examining the label with what looked like genuine appreciation. "This looks expensive. Too good for a simple weeknight dinner." "Nothing's too good for family," I said, watching her face carefully. She smiled, but there was something predatory in her expression. "I'll open it now so it can breathe. Dinner will be ready in about 30 minutes. I watched her carry the wine into the kitchen, my heart pounding. This was really happening. They were really going to try to kill me tonight in front of my own son. The living room felt like a stage set, with Clark and David chatting about football while I sat in the chair that had been positioned to face both of them. I felt like I was on display, the guest of honor at my own funeral. "How's work been, David?" I asked, desperate to focus on something normal, something real. "Busy, but good," he said. "We're handling a big estate case right now. It's fascinating how complicated families can make things when money's involved. People do terrible things to each other over inheritance." The irony was so sharp it made my chest ache. My son was unknowingly describing his own family situation while his wife prepared to serve me poisoned wine. Cleo returned with glasses and the opened bottle. "This smells divine, Norma. Where did you find it?" "A little shop downtown," I lied smoothly. "The owner recommended it for special occasions." She poured 4 glasses, handing them out with ceremony. Clark raised his immediately, but I noticed Cleo barely touched hers to her lips when we toasted. David drank his normally, chatting about his cases between sips. After about 10 minutes, I began to feel dizzy. The room started to tilt slightly and my tongue felt thick in my mouth. "Are you feeling all right, Mom?" David asked, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "You look a little pale." I looked at Clark and Cleo, both watching me with expressions of concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. They were waiting for me to collapse, waiting for their plan to unfold perfectly. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. The wine I'd brought wasn't the wine they'd expected to poison. I'd switched bottles after having the first one tested, bringing an identical vintage that was completely clean. What I was feeling wasn't poison. It was the most devastating realization of my life finally hitting me full force. My husband and daughter-in-law really were trying to kill me, and they were doing it right in front of my innocent son. I excused myself to the bathroom, claiming I needed a moment to steady myself. In the hallway mirror, I practiced the performance of my life. I had to look sick enough to convince them their plan was working, but not so sick that David would call an ambulance. When I returned to the living room, I made sure to sway slightly and grip the doorframe for support. "Mom?" David was on his feet instantly, concern creasing his face. "Maybe you should sit down." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, though I let my voice waver. Just a little lightheaded. Must be all the excitement of the holiday season. I caught the look that passed between Clark and Cleo, anticipation mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. They thought their plan was working perfectly. Maybe we should skip dinner, David suggested. I can drive you home. Nonsense, Cleo interjected quickly. Norma just needs some food in her stomach. Low blood sugar can make you feel dizzy. I'll get dinner on the table right now. Over the next hour, I gave the performance of my lifetime. I picked at my food, complained of feeling nauseous, and even let myself stumble slightly when getting up from the table. David hovered around me, worried and attentive, while Clark and Cleo watched with predatory patience. I think I should take you to see Dr. Morrison tomorrow, Clark said as we prepared to leave. These dizzy spells are concerning. Dr. Morrison, who had suggested sleeping pills. Dr. Morrison, who was probably part of their plan to make my death look natural. Maybe you're right, I said weakly. I haven't been feeling quite myself lately. David hugged me goodbye, holding me a little longer than usual. Take care of yourself, Mom. Promise me you'll see the doctor tomorrow. I promise, I said, meaning it in a way he couldn't understand. The drive home was quiet. Clark kept glancing at me, checking to see if I was getting sicker. I let my head loll back against the seat and closed my eyes, playing the part of a woman whose body was slowly shutting down. But inside, my mind was crystal clear and absolutely furious. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library and set my real plan in motion. While Clark was at his weekly golf game, a game I now suspected was actually a meeting with his loan sharks, I drove to the law office of Patricia Simmons, an estate attorney I'd found through Marcus Chen's recommendations. Mrs. Hartwell, Patricia said after I'd explained my situation, what you're describing is attempted murder. We need to involve law enforcement immediately. Not yet, I said firmly. I need to protect my son. If we move too fast, he could be charged as an accessory, or at minimum, his marriage and career could be destroyed. I need to handle this carefully. Patricia nodded slowly. What do you want to do? First, I want to change my will. Everything goes to David, with very specific language that Cleo receives nothing if she's involved in my death, or if she and David divorce within 5 years of my passing. That's smart. What else? I want to set up a living trust that removes Clark's access to our joint accounts. And I want to document everything, the gambling debts, the affair, the murder plot, in a sealed letter that will only be opened if something happens to me. We spent 3 hours crafting documents that would protect my son and ensure that Clark and Cleo would get nothing if they succeeded in killing me. More importantly, the documents would serve as evidence if they tried again. That afternoon, I called Dr. Morrison's office and made an appointment for the next day, but I also made a second appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister, who was a cardiologist at the university hospital. I want a complete cardiac workup, I told Dr. Chen, and I want it documented that my heart is perfectly healthy. If something happens to me in the coming weeks, I want there to be a clear medical record that contradicts any claims of natural heart failure. Dr. Chen, who Marcus had briefed on my situation, agreed to run every test possible. That evening, Clark was unusually solicitous. He made dinner, brought me tea, and suggested I rest on the couch while he cleaned up. You still look pale, honey, he said, studying my face with what looked like genuine concern, but felt like a predator evaluating wounded prey. I'm worried about you. I'm feeling a little better, I said carefully. Maybe whatever it was is passing. I caught the flash of disappointment in his eyes before he masked it with a smile. Well, let's see what Dr. Morrison says tomorrow. I made you an appointment for 10 o'clock. Of course he had. He was probably coordinating with the doctor to get me prescribed something that would make the next attempt more successful. That night, I lay in bed listening to Clark's breathing and planning my next moves. I had changed my will, documented the evidence, and created a paper trail that would protect David. But I still needed to find out how far this conspiracy went and whether there were others involved. The next morning, I went to my appointment with Dr. Morrison first. He was a thin, nervous man who had been our family doctor for 15 years. When I described my symptoms from the night before, he immediately suggested increasing my blood pressure medication and adding a mild sedative for anxiety. just to help you relax during this stressful time," he said, scribbling prescriptions. The holidays can be so overwhelming at our age, as if 62 made me decrepit and disposable. "Dr. Morrison," I said carefully, "has my husband spoken to you about my health recently?" His pen paused for just a moment. "He's expressed some concerns, yes. Mentioned that you've been having some dizzy spells, some confusion. It's not uncommon in women your age. Women my age." There it was again, this dismissive attitude that made me invisible, insignificant, perfect cover for murder. I took the prescriptions but had no intention of filling them. Instead, I drove directly to Dr. Sarah Chen's office for my cardiac workup. The tests took most of the day, but the results were exactly what I'd hoped for. My heart was strong, my blood pressure normal, my cholesterol levels excellent. Dr. Chen documented everything thoroughly and gave me copies of all the reports. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said as I prepared to leave, "you're in remarkable health for someone your age. If anything were to happen to your heart suddenly, it would be highly suspicious." That evening, I showed Clark the prescriptions from Dr. Morrison. "See, I told you something was wrong," he said, examining them with satisfaction. "Dr. Morrison knows what he's doing. You should start taking these right away." "I think I'll wait a few days," I said. "See if I continue feeling better on my own." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Norma, the doctor prescribed these for a reason. You don't want to risk your health over stubbornness." "A few days won't hurt," I insisted. That night, Clark made another phone call from his office with the door closed. I crept close enough to hear fragments of his conversation. "Won't take the medication. Suspicious. Might need to accelerate." My blood ran cold. They were getting impatient. If I didn't cooperate with their slow poisoning plan, they were going to try something more direct. The next morning, Cleo called with another invitation. This time, her voice had an edge of desperation beneath the sweetness. "Norma, I was wondering if you'd like to go Christmas shopping with me today. Just us girls. We could have lunch, maybe stop by that new spa you mentioned." A spa, private, isolated, with opportunities for accidents or sudden medical emergencies. "That sounds lovely, Cleo," I said, "but I'm not feeling quite up to a full day out. Maybe we could just have lunch?" "Of course. There's this wonderful new restaurant downtown. Very quiet and intimate, perfect for catching up." After I hung up, I called Marcus Chen. "They're accelerating their timeline," I told him. "I think they're planning something for today. Mrs. Hartwell, this has gone far enough. We need to involve the police now. After today," I promised, "let me get through this lunch. If they try something, we'll have them caught in the act." But as I prepared to meet Cleo for what might be my last meal, I realized I had one more card to play. Something that would protect David and give me the upper hand once and for all. I was done being the victim. It was time to show Clark and Cleo exactly who they were dealing with. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and chose a table where I could see everyone who entered. When Cleo walked in, stunning in a cream-colored coat and designer heels, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She thought she was meeting a confused, vulnerable old woman. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. "Norma," she called out, waving as if we were the closest of friends. "You look so much better today. I was worried about you after Wednesday night." "I'm feeling much stronger," I said, and meant it. "Thank you for suggesting lunch. We don't get enough one-on-one time." She settled into her chair, placing her designer purse carefully beside her plate. Throughout our conversation, she kept checking her phone, clearly nervous about something. "I ordered us some wine," she said when the waiter approached. "That lovely Pinot Grigio you mentioned liking." I hadn't mentioned liking any wine, but I nodded pleasantly. "How thoughtful of you." When the wine arrived, I watched carefully as she poured. Her movements were practiced, confident. This wasn't her first time doing something like this. "To family," she said, raising her glass. "To family," I agreed, lifting mine but not drinking. She took a small sip and launched into chit-chat about Christmas plans and David's work, but her eyes kept darting to my untouched wine glass. "The wine is lovely," she said after a few minutes. "Aren't you going to try it?" "Of course," I said, and brought the glass to my lips without actually drinking. Delicious. She relaxed slightly, and we continued our conversation. She was good at this, I realized. The perfect performance of a caring daughter-in-law. all while watching to see when her poison would take effect. After 20 minutes, I excused myself to the restroom. In the hallway, I called Marcus Chen. "It's happening," I whispered. "She's definitely put something in my wine." "The police are standing by," he said. "Are you ready? Give me 10 more minutes. I want to hear her confession first." When I returned to the table, Cleo was checking her phone again, looking increasingly agitated. "Everything all right, dear?" I asked. "Oh, yes. Just waiting to hear from Clark about something." Waiting to hear that I was dead, most likely. I sat down and picked up my wine glass, pretending to take another sip. "Cleo, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Norma. How long have you been planning to kill me?" The words hung in the air between us like a blade. Cleo's face went completely white, then flushed red. Her hand trembled as she set down her glass. I don't know what you mean. 2 years, I continued conversationally. That's how long you've been sleeping with my husband. That's how long you've been planning my death, the gambling debts, the forged signatures, the isolation from David. You've been very thorough." She started to stand up, but I continued talking, my voice calm and steady. "The poison in my wine glass. The research you've been doing on untraceable substances that mimic heart attacks. The way you've been manipulating David, making him think I disapprove of your marriage." "You're crazy," she whispered, but her voice shook. "You're a crazy old woman." "Am I? Then why don't we call David right now and ask him what you've been telling him about me? Better yet, why don't we call the police and have them test this wine?" Her mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law disappeared, replaced by something cold and vicious. "You stupid old bitch," she hissed. "You should have just died quietly. It would have been so much easier for everyone." "Easier for you, you mean? And Clark." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Clark is pathetic. A weak old man drowning in debt who was easy to manipulate. You think I love him? I needed him to get to your money, nothing more. And David? Do you love my son? Or is he just another stepping stone?" Her smile was pure poison. "David is useful. A successful lawyer with a bright future. But if something were to happen to him after I inherited your money..." She shrugged elegantly. "Accidents happen. My son." She was planning to kill my son too, once she had what she wanted. I stood up slowly, my hand steady as I reached into my purse. "Thank you for being so honest, Cleo. It makes this so much easier." Her eyes widened as she saw the small recording device I pulled out. "You've been recording this?" "Every word. Along with the wire I'm wearing, which has been broadcasting our entire conversation to the police officers waiting outside." The color drained from her face completely. Through the restaurant window, I could see police cars pulling into the parking lot. "You can't. This is entrapment." "No, dear, this is justice." The arrest was swift and efficient. As they led Cleo away in handcuffs, she screamed at me, calling me names that made the other diners stare. But all I felt was relief. It was over. Clark was arrested at home an hour later. Marcus Chen had provided the police with all the evidence we'd gathered: the gambling debts, the forged signatures, the murder plot documentation, everything. The hardest part was telling David. I drove to his office after giving my statement to the police, rehearsing what I would say. "How do you tell your son that his wife tried to kill you and was planning to kill him too?" But when I walked into his office, I saw that he already knew. Detective Rodriguez had beaten me there. David sat behind his desk, his face ashen, staring at a stack of documents. "Mom," he said when he saw me and his voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I went to him and held him while he cried. This strong, successful man reduced to a confused child by the betrayal of someone he'd trusted completely. "She showed me text messages," he said through his tears. "Screenshots of conversations she claimed you'd had with friends, talking about how much you disapproved of our marriage." I believed her. "I actually started pulling away from you because I thought you didn't want me to be happy." "I would never," I whispered. "You're my son. Your happiness is all I've ever wanted." It took months for the legal proceedings to conclude. Clark pled guilty to attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud in exchange for a 25-year sentence. At 71, it was essentially a life sentence. Cleo refused to plea bargain and was sentenced to life without parole, when the jury heard the recording of her confessing to planning multiple murders. The divorce was finalized quickly. I kept the house and recovered most of the money Clark had stolen, though the gambling debts had eaten through a significant portion of our savings. But what I'd gained was worth more than money. I had my son back. David moved into the house with me while he sorted through his own emotional recovery. It was like having my child home again, except this time he was helping me heal too. We cooked together, watched old movies, and slowly rebuilt the relationship that Cleo had systematically destroyed. "I should have known," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The signs were all there. The way she'd intercept your calls, make excuses when you wanted to visit. I just thought she was protective of our time together." "She was very good at manipulation," I said. "That's what made her so dangerous." 6 months after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I sold the house and moved to a small coastal town in Maine, somewhere with no memories of Clark or Cleo, or the life I'd built on lies. David visited often, and slowly we both began to heal. He started dating again, a kind woman named Sarah who worked at the local animal shelter. She reminded me of Jenny, his first wife, in all the best ways. On my 64th birthday, David brought Sarah to visit. As we sat on my new porch overlooking the ocean, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. "Mom," David said, taking my hand, "I know I can never make up for the years I let Cleo keep us apart, but I want you to know that you saved my life. If you hadn't figured out what she was planning—" "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You're my son. Protecting you is what mothers do." But as I sat there in the evening light, surrounded by the family I'd fought so hard to save, I realized I'd done more than protect David. I'd saved myself too. For the first time in decades, I was living for me. No husband to please, no toxic family dynamics to navigate, no one's expectations to meet but my own. At 64, I was finally free. The ocean stretched out endlessly before us, full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. Tomorrow, I might take that photography class I'd always wanted to try, or learn to paint watercolors, or simply sit on this porch and read a good book without anyone interrupting me. For the first time in my adult life, my time was entirely my own, and that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.